Welcome, 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 everybody. I'm joined by a couple new faces and one familiar face. So today I have with me Darth Grader, aka Mark,
Hey
and
guys.
also Cam, who is the co-founder of Roto Grinders and a big Star Wars CCG graded fan and just overall great dude. And as well as Gold Five, also known as Jim Colson. And today we're going to be chatting with Jim about his experience as a part of the uh, volunteer team with Decipher back from 95 2001 and sort of his experience with that as well as a player and collector. So I'm going to hand it over to Cam actually to give kind of a longer introduction of Jim and kind of start the conversation.
Yes, Jim Colston, the man, the myth, the legend. This interview has been in the works for quite some time. I think I initially reached out almost 6 months ago. Sorry it took so long. Everyone who's on the Star Wars forums, Facebook groups, Discord knows who Jim Colson is, as mentioned, Gold 5 from back in the day. We really have wanted to get an interview with Jim. Honestly, because whenever there's a question that pops up in the groups that someone doesn't know the answer to, you usually see the at Jim Colson, tag him, wait a day or two, and then we get the actual answer from Jim himself. And he's always been nice enough to hop in there and answer those questions. And I view him at this point as like a preserver of the legacy and the history, one of the greatest minds in the game that's been there from the start through the finish. And obviously, YouTube wasn't a big thing when Star Wars existed, so we kind of wanted to get on a call with the legend himself and tell some of these stories, preserve some of the history of the great game that is Star Wars CCG, because we are seeing new and returning players come as both collectors, as players, and through the players committee's awesome efforts. So we just think this would be an amazing interview 101 for the history of Star Wars from both a collecting, playing, and community standpoint. So I hand it over to you, Jim. Tell us a little bit about your background as a person, your involvement with Star Wars CCG, Decipher, Lord of the Rings, any other games of note, and where you're at with Star Wars CCG these days.
All right. Thanks, Cam. Personally, professionally, I'm a federal employee, been that for almost 35 years now. And so for my entire involvement in the Star Wars card game, I've been a federally employed civilian. I first started out with the Department of Army, and I currently work for the Department of Defense right now. I'm formerly employed at an organization on the Undersecretary of Defense for at Defense Acquisition University, where I'm a learning director, and so I make sure that the things that are being taught to all the acquisition professionals in the military are to help them properly acquire systems, and the content of the courseware is up to date and correct. So that's what I do for my day job. It keeps me pretty busy. A good portion of that time I spend reviewing military systems. Like I've been on the production line multiple times of the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. I've been out on the flight deck of the Gerald R. Ford, our newest super carrier. And if you Google either one of those two systems, I'm sure you can find out a lot of the problems they're having. And so we get called in to tell them what they did wrong and how to fix it. So that's what I do professionally. Where I started with Star Wars CCG, I have to give you a little bit of backstory here. So, and that is, it goes way back to Dungeons and Dragons when I was a kid. So I played Dungeons and Dragons, and there was a time when people thought that people who played Dungeons and Dragons were a bunch of magic worshippers or devil worshippers, right? And I had some friends that started playing Magic in '93, and they said, "Oh, you need to play this Magic game with us." And so I said, "No, I've already been accused of being a devil worshiper once. I don't want to do it again." And so they were convinced to get me into some sort of card game. So in '94, there was this new sci-fi based card game that came out called Star Trek Customizable Card Game. based upon next generation. And sure enough, I bet. And I got in at the end of 94, and black border was hard to find. I was paying $6 a pack for it back then, and buying it like crazy. Found the white border, bought a bunch of white border, and the rest is history. Then this company announced a brand new, exciting license that they had, Star Wars. And well, I was already up to my armpits in the Star Trek card game. Star Wars was just, my initial pre-order was 6 cases of Premiere, and I didn't quite get all of it. The guy I bought it from realized it was so hot a property that he kept some of my pre-order and sold it to other people at twice the price. But I still ended up getting a good chunk of my pre-order, and was able to continue to buy it. And then I started trying to run events, because I had these fun, great cards, and I just really was trying to run events. So my very first tournament I held in Huntsville, 2 college kids drove up from Tuscaloosa, which is about an hour and a half, about a 2-hour drive to Huntsville. And they were the only 2 people for my first tournament. And so I realized that this was a long haul opportunity. So I just continued to start and schedule and hold events. And then pretty quick, people started showing up. They started driving down from Nashville. They started driving up from Birmingham. And then they said, well, we have a store in Nashville that you can run. So I don't know if you've heard of people like Stephen Lewis, Johnny Chu, and guys like that. So I was running the very first tournament that Stephen Lewis ever played in, and et cetera, et cetera. So I would drive once a month. I would drive up to Nashville. I'd drive down to Birmingham, and I'd drive to Huntsville. And then the 4th weekend, if I was available, I'd squeeze an extra tournament in one of those 3 locations. So it was a lot of fun. I ran a mountain of tournaments. I think Kyle Hoyer told me that I was the single most number of tournaments run by any volunteer in the world. He had ran quite a bit himself, but I eventually passed him on the total tournament count. Now I had some help too, because I used to run a bunch of convention tournaments. And so, when you go to a convention, you schedule 10 tournaments, right? Sealed deck tournaments, constructed event plays and stuff like that. So I'd have a weekend, 2 or 3 days, a weekend where I'd run 10 events or so. So that helped bump my count a little bit too. So all of that, all those events accumulated to me doing events at small and large conventions. I helped run events at Gen Con, of course, at Decipher Con, down to little cons like Deep South Con, Mid South Con, MobiCon. Who's ever heard of MobiCon, right? That's a convention down in Mobile, Alabama. And so I got tapped to run lots of tournaments and events around the world. So that's my experience as far as of the card game and being and doing stuff. And the last kind of, where does it fit today? So one of the big conventions that I used to run a lot of events at was Dragon Con. And I'm the card games director. I'm a director for the convention. And so I still try and make sure that every year in the card games department, we have Star Wars events. And I usually find 1 or 2 guys. They almost always will run a cube event. In past, we've had some sealed product to do sealed events. That's getting kind of tricky to do nowadays. Mm-hmm. It's just because of the expense, and it's scarce. And so I continue to stay involved in the tournament community that way. I haven't run a tournament myself in a long time. That was part of the deal with becoming a director at Dragon Con. They told me you can coordinate and help and do whatever you want, but you can't run events. So because I'm over Magic and everything at Dragon Con. So I make sure I don't show favoritism, but that's the way that goes at that. So that's where my continued involvement. I continue to try and collect things as I can. I find that I'm a little bit more sharing my extras than I am obtaining new novelties. But there's occasionally a few new things that come across. Like I never really collected the Takara stickered sealed product. So I've started to pick a few of those things up here and there. I think Julian's got one for me, and Andy's got a couple for me. So we're working a deal to get me some of those Takara stickered English Star Wars stuff. So I'm still adding stuff to my collection.
And that's actually one thing that we're excited to see. I think we're going to try to do a little bit of a show and tell later on and show off some of the cooler things in your collection. Jim, that was a really great intro and sort of framing of the discussion. And so I'm going to jump in with just a quick question. So,
sure.
The game ran from 1995 to 2001, and it seems like you were pretty active within that. And I'm curious just to see your interpretation of what things look like in 95, 96, 97 versus 2001, right? And there's it's relatively short amount of time, but there's so much content that came out of it, a good number of sets, mechanics that were first of a kind. So I guess I'm kind of curious to see how that evolved from 95 to 2001 at the game's end.
So, there's a lot of different things that kind of occurred during that time frame, like the whole decisions to, whether to have limited or unlimited and revised and all those types of how do we continue to grow the game without making cards go away, meaning, like Magic has their standard cycles, 7th edition, 10th edition, 50th edition, how they basically dump an entire couple years worth of cards and say they're no longer valid for tournament play. Nobody wanted that to happen to Star Wars. So how do you do that? Well, they just successfully did that sort of with Star Trek when they came out with 2nd edition, but they still lost a whole bunch of players and stuff in Star Trek when they moved from 1st edition to 2nd edition. So Decipher was really trying to figure out how to manage that transition in Star Wars, if it could even be done. And so, one of the things they could do was start banning cards. One of the things they could do was issue, a mountain of errata. And that, they tried to errata a little bit. Like, the first errata, what was the very first errata they formally issued? And it wasn't even over game text. It was a picture, an image.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. And then shortly after that came Asteroid Sanctuary in Dagobah. And so right now, and what did they do with that? Did they actually physically replace those cards? And so what kind of revenue did they get off those replacement cards? Nada. Zero. Nilch, right? There you go. There you go.
Had a handy, so.
Yeah, that's one that it's a pain in the butt. I imagine to mail those out to folks like errata pre, modern internet. I think was a real pain to distribute and produce, and especially it was just like a card correction. So yeah. So what the original one looked like. I can't even remember what it was.
Yeah, well, looking at that economic model is like, we just can't continue to do this. And then if you extend those two experiences into issuing massive errata, and it's just like, we don't want, they didn't have the stomach to do that. And so so that's where they came up with, the other thing was, the old Mother May I cards, right? You know what those are, right? That's what we used to call them. Mother May I? Mother May I play this interrupt? No, you may not. Alter, sense, control, right? Right. So, the Mother May I cards were kind of over abused. And, so Decipher started bringing these counter cards into play. That starts, that affected alter, sense, and control and other cards. And then pretty quick, you got a deck limit, right? 60 cards. How can I counter every really nasty MPE type deck and still have a deck that's fun to play with my fun card in it? And so they had to come up with a mechanic that allowed you to go fish out based upon what your opponent was trying to strategize against you, the card to defend against it, at least allow you to kind of play your deck. So that's where the side deck concept came in with shields. And so that's how we got the shields was errata. You know, it was errata or not. And so that's the bottom line. That's how that evolved. So I think it was pretty good. I think it was a pretty in between solution. But I think fundamentally there's some other things they truly needed to try and do to either get to a second edition or something, but that became moot.
Yeah, shields, I think, you know, right now as a returning player, right after 20 years, and I kind of left the game right as shields were introduced, they felt like a barrier to entry, right? Because it's like already a complex game. And then you add on this extra, well, then you have your side deck that has, you know, 15 or 20 cards. And so I think shields are actually an elegant solution now that I understand them. But I do think for sort of that new or returning players, they are daunting to know that you have 60 cards and you have another pile that's underneath this objective. They're starting effect.
So let me tell you a story about shields, right? About negative player experience, right? Why shields are so important to the game. Is that because I had a store owner who would spend, you know, good amount of money on Star Wars. Of course, I helped him with that a lot. But he came up to me, he said, Jim, you know, everybody's playing this game. I want to learn how to play it. And I said, okay, so let me sit down. And I was going to get this little demo deck out. He said, no. I just want to play the game. Throw your best deck at me. I said, Ed, you really don't want to do that. He said, no, I don't care. What you got? Throw it at me. I want to, I'm like going, Ed, you really don't want to do that. And so he's convinced me that, what, you don't think I know how to play the game? You don't think I'm a very good player? So, okay. So I threw an Asteroid Sanctuary deck at him. He said, I'm never going to play this game again.
Yeah, it's just like not a fun interact. I mean, that's the thing about the Star Wars CCG meta of, like, you know, in the 90s. A lot of the best decks were not interactive, or they're kind of like Sense and Alter. I've been playing in this Premier Hoth League, and Sense and Alter is like the worst thing just to play against, especially when you have like a modern lens of what a CCG can be as far as tutors and, you know, cards that pull other things, and kind of removing some of the RNG or the randomness of gaming. But I think I'm going to pause there. I'm going to hand it over to Mark. I know Mark had a couple of questions, and I've been chatting a lot, so I'm going to hand the mic over.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Matt. And hey, Jim. Yeah, I had some questions kind of from the collecting front. And certainly you got a lot of things there, and maybe we can have some inquiries into the vast amount of treasures that exist. And I think we have a similar question occurring on multiple fronts, but maybe what are some of the highlights of your collection? Or maybe you can just throw out a couple stats that might, you know, impress upon people the bounties that lie within your treasure trove.
Right. So with collecting comes, there's different classes or categories of collecting, right? So you can just say, I just collect the cards, right? So I pretty much, you know, a complete collection of the cards. But then there's a subcategories of collection, you know, like the stuff that goes with the cards, like boxes and wrappers and et cetera, et cetera. So you can really extend that out to sealed product and everything else. So, and that's where you find a large part of collectors are in that domain space, the cards and maybe some sealed product. And then you get into the really rich and deep artifacts of the game, and those are artifacts that come from the days of when it was out there and things were going and people were having fun. And some of that may include some of the promotional cards, like the oversized cards and things like that. But I think maybe some of the things that you don't see very often are things that we're just kind of used to. Like, we have our experiences at the conventions, and we would go, and I worked in the Decipher booth doing demos, and in the tournament hall running tournaments, and my wife was usually with me, so she was there usually helping out in the Decipher store, right? So she was there helping sell stuff and all sorts of things, and having a good time. We got to have a shared experience. A lot of times, let me pull something up here. Here we go. So a lot of times, the conventions, they'd have these full screen printed walls, and as a backdrop, they were just huge walls, a 10-foot wall, maybe 15, 20-foot long, and they'd have a huge, nice, gorgeous backdrop. Those things, cost thousands of dollars to produce. But a lot of times, they would have just a carpet wall, and they would put up with little Velcro stickers on the carpet wall these oversized cards. And let me show you here. I got a couple. Here's one right here. It's the Death Star, and here's another one. It's Chewbacca. It's Chewbacca's head. It's about the same size as my head. Okay, a little bit smaller.
Is that what material is that? Is that like a kind of like a plastic?
It's vinyl. It's a vinyl material, and they just put little stickers on the back of it, little Velcro hooks to go on the carpet back. We got,
so that's got to be like one of one, right? Like
they would make a couple, but yeah, there's some of them that I don't even know where these went. Some of these ended up probably in the trash bin at the Decipher headquarters as they were cleaning everything out. Here's just a few of them I ended up with these because I was doing lots of conventions, and at the end of the convention I would would pack up and ship that stuff back. And sometimes they said, towards the end, it's like, where do I send this? And it was just like, well, just hang on to it, Jim. You'll be doing another convention. And then over time, they just stopped doing conventions, and they stopped sending stuff back to them and stuff like that.
Oh, that's a cool one.
There you go.
I saved a good one for the list.
So I'm noticing all these seem to be like pre-special edition, right? Is that kind of the...
Yeah, pretty much. Yep. I think they're all the ones that I have are pre-special edition. But they did. I remember seeing a DVD lots. That's I think that's special edition, right?
Yeah, special edition. Yeah.
I think I remember seeing that. So they did make a few special edition cards. They even had this big vinyl thing they'd put right in the middle. Oversized things. So those are some of the fun things that I have floating around. A couple of cool collector items. I think somebody recently showed one of these. So have you ever seen, and this is really hard to see. I got to get the light just right. Give me just a second. Maybe take it out of the sleeve. All right, here you go. See that?
Yeah.
What is it?
Yes. What is that? So this is a delaminated card where the metal particulate in the inside has delaminated.
Huh.
And these actually happen to have the backs, right? And these are both delaminated cards where it's delaminated. It's not peeled apart. It's actually delaminated. And here's the front. And you notice the front of this one, you notice what set it came from.
Mm-hmm.
The back is darker. There's a little bit. This is the metal edge. There's a little thin metal layer in these cards, right? And this is the metal edge part. This is the piece of the middle, and then the back is a lighter one where the metal is actually delaminated. So those are some things you don't see very often. And I'm sure Andy will be watching this and saying, "Hey, how come you didn't tell me about those?"
You're about to get an offer for those items from Andy.
Those didn't make the Star Wars CCG Encyclopedia PDF somehow.
Yeah. And so you find those occasionally. Like I said, I got 2 or 3 here. But okay, story time. All right. Everybody wants stories. So here's a story. So towards the end, I was in Norfolk, Virginia. Work took me there all the time, right? And so whenever I was there, I would take advantage of going into the offices, stopping by and saying hi and yucking it up with the guys. And it was towards the end, and they had just established the players committee. And so I was kind of there as a PC representative talking to Warren and some of the guys. And it was kind of sad to see, right? It's not, I don't want to bring a downer note to this, but kind of sad to see. I walked in the offices, and right in the middle of this area was this huge pile of garbage. And the garbage wasn't garbage. It was playtest cards. It was just excess inventory. It was Jennifer Ketterman's trash bin. And it was not a trash bin that she dumped. It was a trash bin that she kept of all of the returns and rejects. I'm talking miscut cards, miscolored cards, misprinted cards, you name it cards. There was a huge pile of that stuff. Okay, so now Andy is really squirming in his pants. So and I was just like, wow. I mean, it was an enormous pile. They said, was there anything in here you want to take, Jim? I was like, I'll take the whole pile. But no, I didn't. I probably should have at least grabbed Jennifer's trash. Yeah, it was pretty sad to see just the amount of stuff that they were trying to just clean out the offices and empty out and get rid of stuff. And it was kind of sad to see all that go. But I grabbed a few boxes of stuff for the players committee, and and that it wasn't that much, but some cool things that they ended up with. So yeah. I think some of the other images of the cool things I've got, you've seen all the Hoth light side with dark side backs. You've seen the fade, the Star 2 starter deck with the big water mark that goes across 5 or 6 cards, the water droplet mark. I got a whole page of, and these are the cards are in the collector's guide. I think are my cards, the images of my card that you could probably recognize them here. These are probably images of my cards that were used in those images, because I took a picture of them. I've showed them around a few times. But
so Andy, while you have those up, Andy Talaga actually sent in a few questions we'll circle back to later. But one was specifically, can you ask Jim to talk about Premier Blue halfway, because he wants to document this permanently. So because the question comes up all the time, what is Premier Blue? So we're gonna timestamp this video right here, right now. When anyone asks what Premier Blue is moving forward, so Jim's explanation.
So as you can see, the green, there's a yellow pigment, right? The 3 primary colors are magenta, cyan, and yellow, right? So when the yellow pigment ran out, all they had was the magenta and the cyan, and so this is what the card ended up looking like. So clearly the green cards are blue, right? And the darker cards ended up being purple, but they're also considered to be blue cards as well. And then the red cards missing the yellow ended up pink. And even though they're not blue, they're also considered to be Premier Blue. So that's a pretty good explanation. It's just the cards that were printed missing yellow. You're missing the yellow dye.
So a quick question: this is only in Premier. Was this partially because this is the first set? They're figuring out how to print it. They're also trying to print as much as possible to meet demand for this game, right? Because everybody wanted to buy it and nobody could get enough of it. And just factory errors were more common due to increased demand, as well as, hey, this is the first set we're printing, and there's going to be more errors just based on that. Is that kind of the explanation why there's not a New Hope blue or Cloud City blue?
Yeah, so it's a combination of factors, right? For example, Cardamundi was probably the only real place to print really good quality cards in the world, and so their factory in Belgium was just maxed out. And so if you didn't have a customer service on-site person, quality control on-site person for your products, you had to rely upon their quality control. And I'm not saying Cardamundi didn't have good quality control. What I'm just saying is that unless you had your own guy on site, it is highly likely that things would slip through. And where Decipher was just starting up, they're just a startup, right? At this point, they'd done Star Trek, and at this point, they'd probably really only released 1 or maybe 2 sets of Trek, and so they really didn't necessarily have the capacity to get a European on site helping with quality control. Later on, they did, so that helped out quite a bit with later on quality control. But no matter what, you're going to have production issues as things go along, and as they move their production to the United States with PBM graphics, they had a lot higher opportunity to control the quality a lot more, because they could send somebody down to the PBM factory pretty easy.
This might be a slight aside, but are there, just because you brought up like the printing, like are there certain delineations in the printing history of Star Wars CCG? Like I noticed when you go from, I think like Hoth to Dagobah, the cards get a lot more glossy. Are there like big milestones in terms of printing that were encountered that you might be aware of?
Yeah, so Decipher learned a lot with Star Trek. I mean, it's amazing Star Trek survived, right? But the thing they learned was that if you could do it domestically, you're in better shape. But they also, Star Wars was such a global property that they wanted to keep some of the production, overseas, in the EU in particular. And so by exploring printing options in the United States, you eliminated a huge bottleneck, and that is customs, because it took them almost a year to get alternate universe out after they printed, and that was their first expansion, and they needed it out a lot sooner than that. And in a majority of that time delay that was delayed, not the developing and everything, it was sitting in customs. It just took forever for that stuff to clear customs, and that was partially Decipher's inexperience of understanding how that process worked and everything for large scale distributions, and they got better at that over time. But splitting the production across the different companies and moving some of the production units to stateside really helped Decipher a lot. Plus, it took some of the production burden, the workload burden, off of Cardamundi, because as at the time Star Trek came out and Star Wars, there was a million little card games starting to burst onto the scene. Middle Earth card game, you name it, just all sorts of card games out there. So all the production facilities, especially at Cardamundi, they were just so maxed out. And if you had a slight delay in development, you realize you had to get a printing slot 6 months in advance. And if you had a printing delay, a development delay, which caused you to potentially miss that slot, you were maybe delayed 3 months before the next printing slot opened up.
So does that mean that the play testing was taking place about 6 months before printing? So before A New Hope's printed, this is probably Dagobah is being play tested.
Yeah. And so literally Premiere, New Hope, and Hoth were pretty much all developed at the same time. I mean, they had some refining to do in the other two sets, but they were pretty much all developed at the same time, so that they would work well together, they would play well together. And so a lot of that was all developed at the same time. It's where Dagobah came in, and it was kind of its own start of playtesting. I remember playtesting Endor, and it was about 6 months before the release of Endor that we were up to our armpits and playtesting Endor. Yeah.
That's very interesting insights. I actually have a question too on a collecting bent. So, I got my old box of Reflections with a bunch of fun goodies in there, and it's of course called a collector's bounty. So I guess the question kind of just revolves around collecting in general, how the folks at Decipher saw it, like kind of evolving as the company evolved as well, and how that's kind of either gone with the vision of what Decipher had, or maybe it's evolved in a different direction with the Players Committee and the virtual slips. Just thought I'd get a couple of your thoughts on that.
Oh
process.
yeah, so that's a really good question. So personally, I was a little slow to adopt the collectors, the PC's virtual collector slips, the ones that they started producing, the foil slips and things like that were unique. I don't know how many pages and pages and pages I printed out of the original slips, which I think are pretty much all gone now because they did a whole reboot and changed a lot of that. So I viewed, okay, so this is my opinion, okay. I viewed the anything that the PC produced as a privately produced item. And so I was a little bit more purist in collecting exactly the things that came from the actual Decipher domain space. So I was a little slow to pick up things. So Brian Fred, he's been twisting my arm for months, maybe a couple years, that I should start collecting these virtual foil slips, because I said, but they can just reprint them anytime they want. Anytime they want, they can just go, okay, well, we're going to go back and reprint all these foil slips again. We're going to make 100 of each, or 1,000 of each, or 10,000. I'm like, going. So a card company can still kind of do the same thing, but Brian keeps promising me, no, they'll never do that. They've promised they're never going to do that. So what's keeping the files from getting out in the wild, and some private individual doing the exact same thing? And so no, they protect those things and everything. So okay, so he's gradually convinced me over time that they're a collectible. They're as much as any part of the Star Wars CCG history as anything else. And so there you go. Sweet. It looks pretty nice, I have to admit. And so Brian is starting to go back and collect up. He was out west at a big event last weekend, I think, or two, and he's come back with some bounty, and we're working a trade, and I'm going to end up with a bunch of new foil slips here pretty quick. So yeah, I've kind of come around to the foil slips, and starting to collect those as well too. So those are on my list of what I'm collecting right now as well too.
That's cool. Yeah, they are pretty nifty. I know Brian Fred's actually twisted my arm a little bit on that one as well. They're nice and shiny and all that. So with Decipher, did they kind of see like collectors gravitating towards the reflection sets, and then maybe the main sets would be more for the players? Although, of course, you have like the packs, which is part of the fun of opening. So how did that kind of all play into the multiverse of, collecting and playing? I mean, they're kind of play together, but on the other hand, they sometimes butt heads a little bit because, players want to be able to get the cards to make their decks, but then collectors, of course, want, some of the rare cards because, like you said, there's only so many, Luke Skywalker Jedi Knights floating out there, which are a good card for both decks and collectors. So were there any thoughts on that at Decipher, or did that change over time, or
So that's interesting that you talk about Decipher and stuff like so. Towards before the license ended, Decipher had tons of ideas going on. So you've heard of, we talked about Reflections Gold, and that was a set they're trying to push out, right? But there are also lots of other plans, and they kind of had to do that. They kind of had to have these plans in place, because they were still bidding and hoping to get to retain the license from Lucasfilm. Well, any good soothsayer can read the tea leaves and know that that it's all about the money, and that because there was a cost sharing thing going on with Wizards and Hasbro, that it only once Hasbro brought Wizards, everybody knew that the license was going to go to Wizards, because there was profit sharing going on there with Lucasfilm. And so it was like, okay, Lucasfilm owns parts of Hasbro, and so they're going to make money not only from the license, but they're going to make money from the sales. So it's kind of like, okay, Decipher was going to lose the license. But they did a super valiant effort to not do that, and they had to make plans and show that we know we're going to lose the license and just give up. They didn't give up. They kept trying as hard as they could. So they had lots of plans. And so I remember one time I got a phone call and said, "Hey, Jim, would you join the conference call with us really quick?" And I went, "Sure." And so they started talking about, we want to try and do some cool things that we see in the collector's marketplace. And so we're talking Topps cards now, right? And so Topps Cards was doing these film cells, and they were doing all sorts of stuff. And so they said, well, what would you do? What would you think as a collector if we introduced the film cells, actual film? We bought the movies, a print of the movies, and cut it up and stuck it in a Decipher card. I said, well, as a collector, I'd love it, right? Absolutely, you got to do something like that, And I talked to him about other relics, fabric relics, film cell relics, other type of relics that you find in the Topps marketplace, which I have a monster collection of that too. For example, like I just got this new set of Masterworks in. There's an actual stamp, a UK stamp. This is a brand new Masterworks set that just came out a couple weeks ago, and there's another one, pretty cool stuff. That's actual physical stamp in the card. Anyway, so they're talking about doing stuff. They're talking about doing things like this, that's Emily Swallow for the armor in Mandalorian. So they're talking about doing all this kind of cool stuff that they're doing with the Topps cards, and I'm like going, oh yeah, absolutely do that. I love it, And so I said, but it's gonna be tough to do to incorporate into gameplay. So if you do it, can it have to be a card that not necessarily goes in the decks, but might impact or influence the gameplay? And that's where things like they were thinking like, okay, well, maybe if we just did those that were shields or something like that, because you never really shuffled that into your deck. Because you can see, I mean, here's a relic card, right? Here's a relic card with a little metal medallion. See how thick that card is? There's no way you're going to put that in a deck and shuffle it, right?
Yeah, it's not going to work too well.
So with film cells, you're going to end up with a card that was thicker, absolutely, than a normal playing card. There's no way around that. And so, we talked about that. And so I think that was where they were headed. And there's mock-ups out there. I think it's been on the Facebook group where you've actually seen the mock-ups of those cards. Somebody has a mock-up of that card. And so those are the types of things that Decipher was really trying to incorporate to expand not just the player community, but the collecting community as well too. And they had experience with that because in the Star Trek game space, there were more people who collected Star Trek, the card game, not the card game, CCG, than actually played the game. And I would imagine 80% of their sales went to pure collectors and not gamers in Star Trek. And so they wanted to bring the Star Wars balance in proportion to the Star Trek one, where their primary market were the gamers in Star Wars. There were collectors out there, yes, but not to the same ratios that they had with Star Trek. So they were trying to do things to bring more of the collectors into the community. And I think that's probably what they were trying to do. And I supported it. I said, absolutely, because you'll just end up selling a ton more product. And the collectors won't care if it's a Vader or a Luke or whatever. They'll get extras of that, and they'll just get rid of them because they're just going to want one of each. They don't care if, so the really big mains, they'll just dump them on the marketplace and make them more accessible to the rest of the Star Wars players.
That's definitely fascinating to hear your perspectives there. And I'm just going to hit the collector's drum a little bit harder one more time. So one of the things that we're big here on this channel is the graded cards. And I know it's a little bit polarizing at times, but I actually got this Cam card from Cam here. It's a Obi-Wan Kenobi graded by SGC. And that's something I think it's kind of taken off a lot in the last probably 5 to 10 years, especially, is the growth of graded cards. It's something that's really big in other collectors markets, such as sports and even things like Magic the Gathering and Pokemon. So I just wanted to get any thoughts on whether, say Decipher, it was anticipated that there'd be, cards that might someday be really desirable or just if you have any other thoughts on grading in general as it comes to collecting.
So absolutely. I mean, I remember talking to the Decipher guys about graded cards, and as a matter of fact, I think there was even a point where they had discussed entering into some sort of card grading agreement with a company, a PSA or somebody like that, and having cards come right out of the manufacturer right to the graders, and in marketing those graded cards directly to collectors. So there are even thoughts in that domain space. Wait, once Decipher had its doors open still. But ultimately at that time, there wasn't a sufficient mass. There wasn't a critical mass of people that actually seeking out and trying to understand the potential investment that graded cards are. So that's the key word there, right? So one's a collectible and one's an investment. So if it's graded, it's now no longer considered just a collectible. It's an investment. And so that's what people have to get their mind around, is that there are people that are willing to invest significant dollars in high quality collectibles. And that's where graded, non-disputable, authoritative authentication comes in. And so, yeah, there is a space for graded cards, and that's for investors. If you're not, and people can say, all right, so I invest in gold and precious metals and commodities, etc. I don't invest in cardboard. Well, okay. So tell that to some of the Magic guys. Tell that to Andy Talaga, right? He did just fine with Magic cards, right? That's where he made a lot of the money that he's using to build his Star Wars collection from, is selling Magic cards that he had invested in. So absolutely, there's a space for graded cards for those that are wanting to invest. For your casual player and collector, they're nice to have if you run across them, but you're not going to see your average Joe chasing after graded cards. It's just a little extra expense for, it's going to be nice to maybe have that graded 9 Japanese Vader or something like that, but that's it. So, some of the super power cards that you might want to get graded just to protect and keep encased in protection. But for, that magnetic second tube, I don't think so. Sorry.
I think it's interesting because it's a reframing argument, right? So I talked with some folks about my cards, like, oh, so the toys, like, oh, well, no, they're collectibles. So you have to reframe toys as collectibles and then collectibles as investments. And it's just a lot of if the average person looks and thinks that these little cards, the average person walks into a local game store and it's like, oh, Magic the Gathering, that's a fun toy for children. You're like, no, actually it's this, international IP with millions of people collecting and hoarding it and, billions of dollars in the market. But the average person doesn't see it that way. So it's this argument that I think needs to be made about reframing it from a toy to an investment. So I completely agree though, Jim.
Yeah.
Thanks for your thoughts on that. Definitely well-valued input there. I think Cam has some crowdsourced questions that he's got lined up for you. So there you go, Cam. Take it away.
All right. We're going to change the tone here a little bit. We're calling this segment the Legends Corner. I had a lot of questions I wanted to ask you myself as someone who's played since 1996, but I didn't even feel qualified to ask the legend Jim Colson some questions. So I dug into the community. I reached into the archives. I found some other legends of the community that kind of phoned in some questions. Some of these have already been mentioned and answered. And then I've got like a question or two of myself at the end. So first off, Andy Talaga, shout out. Andy's been on Darth Grader before. I think most people in the Facebook group know him. He's one of the top, we'll just say, collectors of all time.
It was a great interview.
Just a good dude. Great guy. Love Andy. Anyways.
Yeah, we're all huge Andy fans here. So, and these are all people, by the way, that I have just by happenstance have mentioned your name, like in some sort of a story or something. So I tried to get people you knew. So Andy had the most questions. We'll start with a couple of his. He wanted to do the Premier Blue segment that we already touched on. And he asked about the misprint box from, I think it was Jennifer, you said.
Yeah.
But he also asked, do you have any information about a scrapped Return of the Jedi 2 player set?
Oh, so that's a good one. I think I know that they were talking about another 2-player box set. But I don't know why it was scrapped. I think it might have had to do with the lackluster sales of the Premiere and Hoth ones, and so I think that those were. You just have to look at the sales figures and understand why a product moves forward or doesn't. And I think just the sales, the slow sales, the nature part of that is why the primary reason why that was scrapped. But there's Rob Burns is on the group, and he might be a good question to kind of randomly put that out there on the Facebook group and tag Rob Burns or somebody else out there that was in the development of the product development. So I think there's a couple people out there in the group that you could probably ping that question to. I don't know that one.
Well, we'll get Rob to watch this video. Rob, when you see this, please drop an explanation in the YouTube comments, and Matt will pin it to the top. So we'll have a more detailed answer there. Kind of piggybacking on that question on talking about the 2-player sets. And this is, this question showcases the nuance of Talaga collecting perfectly. This is as nuanced as it gets, in my opinion. Is there a way to tell the difference between Premier 2-player sets that have a pack of black border limited or white border limited in the box if it's already sealed? So I guess, some of these boxes varied with what packs they had inside.
They did. And I know we recognized that early on up front when we were buying them and opening them for whatever reason. I don't know why we would buy multiples and open multiples, but we would. So no and yes. So this can drive Andy crazy too. So the way you could tell what was inside of it was the provenance. The packaging didn't have any difference. So the provenance means where was that box sold at? So if it was sold at Kmart, it had a white border pack in it. If it was sold at Walmart, it had a white border pack in it. If it was sold through your retail hobby shop, it had black border packs in it.
Wow, that's beyond interesting. That's awesome. That is next level collection strategy from Andy and the insider knowledge from Jim there.
So if you have a 2-player game that's got a sales sticker or something like that on it from Kmart or Walmart,
I have one handy. Keep talking. We'll check live on air.
Yeah, I think I might have one at my fingertips here too, real quick. There's a super high probability that now this is 2-player Hoth, but you can see the Walmart stickers. Yeah. And these are the stickers that you're looking for right here. See that? Walmart.
Yeah. I don't think I have any of the green affixed or tags on it.
So yeah. So there, Kmart always really good about putting stickers on everything. So if you run across one of those, it's got a Kmart or Walmart sticker on it, it's usually white border.
Okay, that's fascinating. Next up, we have already mentioned on the show again, Brian Fred, one of the leading community members. I think everyone knows Brian Fred at this point. I don't know this story. I'm assuming you know the answer. He kind of set me up here. So, who is your friend? I believe he's Japanese. Who you would trade cards with at every convention, and what was his involvement?
So I think we first met, I believe it was at a Decipher con in Norfolk. The guy had flown all the way out from Japan just to go to Decipher con. It's like, you got to be kidding me. And so we started trading then. I think that's where I got most of my Japanese Jedi Council was from him, which Young Jedi Council. And because I'd never seen it, I knew that they had Japanese Menace, but I didn't know they had Jedi Council. And so I traded a lot with him. And then it was that same year, or I think it was maybe that same year, or the next year, we met again at Gen Con. I was helping run some events, and we connected up in the Decipher tournament hall, and the guy had Japanese trading card game. No, it was I think it was a trading card game, and Young Jedi and Decipher, Star Wars. And I locked him into this trade as probably, I don't know, a couple $1,000 worth of cards we were trading back then. And it took us like 6 or 8 hours to do this trade.
Probably the biggest trade of all time at that point.
And Brian Fred, I think, was pretty sure he was there at the Gen Con, and we were there constantly haggling over stuff. I mean, we traded a lot of cards, and I got a lot of good Japanese cards from him, and I had, of course, all the English ones. So everything, it was always a question of what more did he have? What more did he have? What more did he have? Because I had a lot to trade, and so everything he wanted he could get from me. It's just we had people lined up to trade with him, and they couldn't trade. They were leaving because we were going this massive trade that took multiple hours to trade. And he got a little frustrated, I think, at one point. And so I realized that. And so we finished the trade. But ever since then, Brian Fred's accused of me keeping him in the basement of my house.
Well, with the current state of the Japanese market, for those unaware, it's red hot right now. It's totally exploding. It seems like you got the better end of that trade.
Yeah, I did. And somewhere, the other day I ran into some Japanese cards I had, and his business card was in there. So I was going to give him a call and say hello, see if he still remembered me. But I doubt he would forget. That was probably an ordeal that he'll never forget, that trade at Gen Con.
Well, if you get in contact with him, I think everyone would be interested in getting more Japanese Star Wars CCG right now. Yeah. Next up on the list, we have, forgive me if I pronounced your last name incorrect. We've done tons of trades and deals, but Julian Cocard, I believe. He's got some of the more extensive collection and knowledge in the industry as well. His question for Jim is, and if I don't, maybe we can do a solo of Jim's background as I ask this question, Matt, but do you, Jim, even know what treasures you have in your mansion?
All right, so that's a fair question. Like I said, I thought I had lost those Rebel Squad, Rebel Leaders poster, and then I came across them the other day, and I was rummaging through looking for something else, and that's always the way it happens. Is I run across them, and I'm like, oh, here they are, and I found all the autographed ones, and then I found a bunch that were just plain unsigned. And so I decided to put those out and make them available to people. And you saw probably in the Facebook group, you saw people posting and showing those off. Of course, I kept one for myself, the one with all the signatures on it. And that was a lot of fun going around to the conventions and meeting the other squadron members and getting them to sign on that. And I know I was in Gold Squad, so I was pretty tight on only allowing Gold Squadron members to sign that poster because it was a Y-Wing, right? That was Gold Squadron. So we don't want no red X-Wing guys signing this document. So not that they weren't all good friends, there's a friendly little rivalry there. We used to say we drive the bus because the Y-Wings were 2-seaters, right? And X-Wings were 1-seaters. So we used to say we drive the bus.
That's awesome. And that kind of leads me to one of my questions for you. And this is more a documentation of history from Jim's brain, but I got 3 technically tournament items here. If Matt can zoom in, I'm going to put them up to the camera now. One, this is one of the more known tournament foils. I don't know if you can get the glimmer right now. Corellian Corvette, only outclassed probably by the Imperial class Star Destroyer or maybe Qui-Gon or Darth Maul. If you could tell us about those. And then this is one of the more obscure things I think I own that not many people talk about. It's the tournament pins. So could you just give us a quick overview of what tournament foils and tournament pins meant to you as a tournament director?
Well, so these foils here were all DecipherCon exclusives, right? These are DecipherCon exclusives, and they were only, if you came, you had to choose which one you want. You know, they didn't even give you like, well, both the Star Destroyer and the Corvette. They only gave you one or the other. So it was, of course, everybody liked the Star Destroyer, so a lot of those were distributed that way through the DecipherCon. And they also put those in the fall after DecipherCon. They had some left over, and they put them in the regional tournament kits for the following year. So if you had a regional event or something like that, in the binder they sent out for the winners and the people top placements, they put a curling Corvette and a ICSD foil in there. And so they were distributed in those two methods. So
and these are much rarer in general.
So if you look at the collector's guide, there should be a picture of the tournament foil sheet. And if you look at that, there's 10 of every foil except for one. And there's only one ICSD and only one Corvette on each of the foil on those respective light side and dark side foil sheets. So as a ratio, they're 10 to 1 more rare than regular tournament foils. And they're limited distribution. You had to go to one of those events where they distributed, and that was it. I think that maybe there were a few given out as prizes at that DecipherCon as well too. But for the most part, every registered participant got to pick one.
Awesome. And what's the story of the tournament pins? I'm not even sure I know the answer there. I think it was choose what deck you got at the start.
Yeah, so that was a brainchild idea that to send out as part of the tournament kits, because when they were doing EPP drives, you would have enough cards to kind of build one side deck. You wouldn't be able to play both sides, and so you just kind of go through and so they were meant to kind of pin on your shirt and identify you as a light side player, and that was what it was for. And somewhere I still got from all those tournaments I ran, I still got a bag full of those sitting around somewhere.
Nice. Now, that's a cool collectible right there.
They also made keychains and pins. So there's a couple of keychains and pins out there too.
Interesting. I'll have to be on the lookout to add that to my collection next. My final question for you is kind of to the history of the end, sadly, of Decipher when it lost its license. You had experience with or some knowledge about a little knowledge about some of the unreleased sets, Reflections. We know Reflections 1, 2, and 3. I used to have them up here. But there's also talks of Reflections 4, 5, and 6 and Reflections Gold. Just kind of curious what the story was with those. I have a couple Reflections Gold cards here. I was curious if you knew anything about this. Question pops up so often in the Facebook groups. I get tagged to kind of clarify. There was actually an Anakin card beyond just his pilot icon. It just didn't quite get released. A big part of that was the difficulty in game mechanics of trumping Vader with an 8-year-old. As you can see here, he was already apparently overpowered. A playtester knocked him down to player power 2 from power 3. And it does say Vader in bold at the top. So I'm curious just the general nature of the Reflections Gold or unreleased Reflections set, your knowledge there, and if you have any insight on that infamous Vader mechanic that never released.
Yeah, so the gold was never sent out for playtesting. All the playtesting that was done with it was internal. And so that's why the few rare printed copies that exist, were edited on the spot as they were trying to do some playtesting with them. And anytime you just do strictly internal playtesting, you don't get the critical testing abilities of the minds of some of those key top tournament players out there, and how to take a card and really twist it and manipulate it into its worst version. And so that's where they just didn't have time to do that. And so if you look at a lot of like Reflections Gold, and the images are all out there. If you wanted to go out and find and look at all the different cards, you can. But if you really wanted to really look at those and print those and play test those, there's some pretty broken cards in that set.
I've heard that it's a good thing the token system didn't get released into the wild.
Yeah. And so the result is that it's probably a good thing that Reflections Gold never hit the streets. Although they had some pretty cool stuff in it. There were some real mechanic problems that were in there. So
do you think we would have seen an Anakin Skywalker? Let's say the whole license losing process didn't happen in an alternate universe. How would you have, or do you have any insight into how Decipher would have solved the prequels Anakin Skywalker dilemma?
Well, so you can't have Star Wars without Anakin, right? Yeah, it's not going to happen. So they would have had to figure out how to do that, and of course, how do you do that? And they have experience of doing that a little bit. They could do like they did with Lord of the Rings or with Star Trek. Do blocks. Say you could have different time frames or sets that are only compatible with each other at a certain time frame or a block. Episode 1, because that was in the thought process. That's why all the episode 1 cards have an episode 1 icon on them.
Right.
We never used it. There was rarely any cards that targeted, but that was there because of a very specific reason, to potentially move to blocks and say, okay, we're going to have events and formats, episode 1 only. And that way they can have Anakin.
So just a quick follow-up there. Do you think, this is all speculation, but if the license hadn't been lost, that they would have maybe done a second edition, right? Like they did with Star Trek? Because like looking at the two-sided backs, it is a clunky mechanic when you look at like from a modern, gaming standpoint. Like obviously the 90s was like the heyday of CCGs and everything was just kind of like being figured out as they went along. But I just think that there's a world where there's a more streamlined product that would have been easier from production, easier for, like Lord of the Rings, right? You have different cultures or races in there. That's just an indication at the top. Do you think that was sort of in the works, or, thoughts?
I mean, clearly they learned that from Star Wars, not to have different backs, right?
it's like such a mess, right? To have 2 bags, 2 of everything, it's funny to think about it, but.
So Lord of the Rings and all their subsequent games, even so Young Jedi had the 2 different backs as well, but still they I think there would have been a second edition. I think that in the end, while they didn't want it, it would have gotten to the point where they had to have it. So you noticed Wars, right? Wars doesn't have. There's 3 major factions, maybe 5 in total. They've only got 1 back.
Yeah.
So you're looking at possibly, the future second edition Star Wars.
For those that don't know, after Decipher lost the license, they did release, I think it was a premiere set and an expansion set. I've got a couple in the back, and it's called Wars, not Star Wars, and it's based on their own IP of and their own intergalactic space story, and the mechanics are almost identical to Star Wars. There's just a few tweaks. I think the key one is you can have like up to 4 cards per deck, so there's a cap on the number of cards you can use, which is brilliant in hindsight, like Asteroid Sanctuary. But then there was more than light side and dark side, to Jim's point, and it wasn't shown through the back of the card, to Matt's point.
Yeah. So I think the card backs were cool, though. Nothing like having that rebel symbol out there or the Imperial symbol out there. But they were going to have to get away from it, because what about the Republic symbol? What about, all the expanded universe symbols? How are you going to build decks based upon those things and have an Imperial symbol on the back? So there were all these pieces in play, in motion, coming out that were really going to take us down the road to a common back. I just think that while there was a massive discussion on continually going on, there would have been a critical mass, a critical point in time where they would have had to just said, okay, look, one back, reboot 2.0, build your decks. It's going to have a single back. So.
Yeah, well, I guess for us with these collections, it's good that didn't happen, because the cards would have become worthless from the first edition, right? I guess valueless.
So let me go down that road a little bit. So you know what cards are worth more in Star Trek, first edition or second edition?
I'm gonna guess second edition, right?
Nope.
I would guess first for what we're seeing in Magic.
Yep. I mean, it's the older cards or collectibles. I really don't think that the cards, collectors wise, would be worthless. Now, there's a massive schism that had happened when they came out with second edition, is a lot of first edition players says, I'm quitting the game. I'm not going to play the game anymore. Right. But, and that happened. There was a drop off, but they were able to weather that drop off because 80% of the sales of Star Trek were collectors. And so 80% of their audience did not go away. So, the organized play suffered a little bit for a little while, but they ended up with a better product. I mean, the second edition game, well, I grew up on first edition. It was a much more streamlined and a much more pleasant experience to play. So I think that the Decipher learned a lot of lessons from both their Star Trek and Lord of the Rings, and they would have been able to incorporate those in the Star Wars second edition. I'm kind of sad that they didn't get the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, Jim, you're really bumming me out that they didn't get the opportunity to do so. I mean, I think when I compare it to other card games, like Decipher just made such pretty cards, iconic looking Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. I can't speak to Star Trek. I haven't really gotten into it, but just such good looking cards, high quality product. It bums me out that they don't exist really anymore.
I got to hammer home that point. You can't get through an episode with Mark and I without mentioning that this card game just is so important from a collector standpoint to me. It stands out to any Star Wars fan, because this is one of the few games that worked directly with Lucasfilm. There is photos of outfits or equipment that aren't in the movie. There's different angles. There's custom shots. There's custom lore, and I believe some of that has been even like used in current media and future Star Wars as inspiration for something. So I just can't name anything like it from a collector standpoint. If you're collecting this game, you're collecting a part of Star Wars history. How do you feel about that, Jim?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, there is Star Wars canon that came from the CCG, period. I mean, without a doubt, names of characters for one thing, right?
Correct.
A lot of the characters just didn't have names until the Decipher named them, and that became their names.
Am I making it up, or did the Crate Dragon also come from the card? Is that?
So yes, that is absolutely true. That the visualization, the final interpretation of the Crate Dragon in Mandalorian, was drawn from the Decipher visualization on the card, Decipher's card. Absolutely.
I remember the employee posting that in the group when the Mandalorian episode came out, and you could almost like feel his emotion through the post. He was like, Oh my gosh, my work from 20 years ago was just repurposed to create a Crate Dragon by Disney in the Mandalorian. And that's all because of this card game. Not all because, but he basically was the first to create and show what a Crate Dragon was, and that was repurposed. So,
Well, I think that might actually be a nice high note to end it on. I think you want to do a quick, do you have any other things to show and tell? Maybe 3 or 4 minutes of show and tell, if you have anything left in your cache.
Oh gosh. Where do I start?
we
I mean,
can always do a different, a whole different segment just on show and tell.
Yeah, we could.
Or Mark and Cam, do you guys have other questions?
Well, while he gets organized, what's your rating on a scale of 1 to 10 of the Disney Star Cruiser experience? I'm asking because you sent us photos, fully an outfit from Disney last week.
Is it worth it?
Yes. So, is it worth it? So, any once in a lifetime experience, I think, is worth it, right? So you just have to put a dollar value on that and decide whether you do it or not. So there were 8 of us in the largest cabin that they offered, which is a 12 grand for 2 nights. And we divided that up. That works out to be about $750 per person per night. There's no discrimination between adults and children. So the fact that there were 5 kids and 3 adults meant that was a pretty expensive ride for the kids. But the experience is immersive, meaning that you want to come, show up in your best costumes, and be prepared to have maybe 2 or 3 costumes to wear throughout the experience, the 2 or 3 day experience. And so you want to be prepared to share your enjoyment of the Star Wars universe with other people, and not be the guy walking around with the with the Alabama or Kansas City baseball hat and stuff like that. So you're just you're there, not there as a sports fan. You're there immersed, and so that people walk by and say, oh, what planet are you from? Type stuff. And the casts are really good about Earth. I haven't heard of that place. Alabama. Yeah. Where's that? Where's an Alabama at? And stuff like that. So they're really good at the immersion aspect of the experience. And it's so you might hear some people saying that it's really scripted, and well, that's good, because you can participate in that scripted activity that they have or not. So my wife and I participated in some. She did a little bit more than I did. I kind of took advantage of the relax and downtime and enjoyed the unlimited food that was exceptional. It was just like all you can eat all the time, just like any other type of cruise. This was a galactic cruise, and it was a lot of fun. It was worth it. Yeah, we're not going to do it every year. $3 grand for the 2 of us every year. I can buy a lot of cards with that.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for chatting with us. Mark or Cam, do you have any kind of closing thoughts? I think this has been such a running the gamut here from graded to inside the brain of some weird Decipher state in the game. This has just been really interesting, and I'm hoping folks enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim. Hopefully we'll be sharing clips of this video for years to come for new and returning players. Anyone out there, we have a passionate fan base in all the Facebook groups. Just search Star Wars CCG, Star Wars CCG graded, and hope to see you out there.
All right.
We had a lot of good notes here. Thank you very much for your time. And yeah, this was excellent.
All right.
It's dark outside. I got to go. It's time to play with the laser with the dog. So she's here reminding me of that.
It's adorable.
All right.
All right. Bye.